All right, guys, let's kick it off. It's a minute or two past 11 a.m., so it's the right time to kick off this webinar. I'm really glad that you guys are joining it, even live. Some of you may watch it as a replay, but those of you who are here have this unique opportunity to ask questions, and that's what I like about webinars, right? It's all about answering questions that you guys may have still even maybe a year or two in recruitment. So we will cover as many questions as we can during this webinar. Now, I would like to introduce myself briefly and the GeekRecruiter also as the online academy, because some of you may know it yet. So very briefly, you guys may know that I'm from the group of technical leaders, CTOs, senior technical managers. I'm actually an ex-CTO, so I spend years recruiting developers, working with them on a daily basis, and that was actually one of the triggers when I realized, like, hey, this is so easy for people who have technical background, who have technical understanding, to find developers, to interview them, to assess them. And then after I left the job and talked to a few of my friends, recruiters, I realized, like, hey, this is just so difficult for recruiters who lack that technical understanding. So that was the initial trigger. And with my co-founder, we started at the GeekRecruiter Academy to actually help recruiters who lack the technical understanding to learn how to interview, how to assess developers, so they can actually eventually get better at what they do. Because you may know about these developers complaining about recruiters who don't know the difference between Java and JavaScript, right? There are lots of jokes around the internet around this. But that's just the basis, right? I believe a great technical recruiter needs to understand the technologies, needs to understand the technical glossary, needs to know how to use the technical foundation to start a discussion with developer, how to have some meaningful, small talk discussion, and so on. But still, as we started working with the recruiters, we've realized, like, hey, this is just the beginning eventually. Because well, most of the recruiters focus on the mundane administrative work. Hey, I have a job description. Let me go through some of the CVs we've received, and I'll match them, right? Like this is going to be sooner or later automated, right? And there are the tools to automate some of these mundane tasks. So I think recruiters need to level up to become full, end-to-end partners to CTOs, like I used to have, like I used to be, to IT directors, and there's a huge knowledge gap to get there, right? So this is what we at the GeekRecruiter Academy want to help with. Like, how can recruiters get really great at understanding technologies without programming knowledge, right? You don't need to program in Python to be able to interview a Python developer, to ask him a few really great questions, so you can decide if he or she is a good fit for a role or not. But you need to know, you need to have this arsenal of weapons that you are able to use at the right moment. And that's where the GeekRecruiter Academy, the knowledge we pull from the heads of CTOs comes into place. So we interview CTOs, we interview hiring managers, and they share their favorite questions. What do they ask a Ruby developer during an interview? What do they ask a DevOps engineer during an interview? And this is super helpful to a recruiter, technical recruiter like you, all right? So I hope this will be helpful again. During this webinar, in the next half an hour or so, we can only cover, as much as we can, right? And not more. I would love to also answer some of your questions. Then, there is much more content also inside the academy. So I encourage you to go through the content either in our blog or inside the academy to understand the topic further. But during this webinar, I will at least cover the full life cycle. So we will talk about how to hire DevOps developers, DevOps engineers, and we will go through a few topics like, what are the discussions, what should you ask during a hiring manager discussion when you first ask him or her, what kind of DevOps developers is he looking for. Then how to source DevOps engineers, where are they, how to get in touch, how to interview them. We will look at some of the questions that you could ask during the interview, right? How to assess them. So based on what do they say, how can you assess if they are a good fit for a role or not, okay? And last, how to attract and motivate. In general, there is not enough developers out there, so you need to know how to attract them, how to motivate them to leave their already great, well-paying job, so they leave the job and join the company, the opportunity you present to them. Okay, so these are the topics we will be going through in this webinar, and I'm keen to answer some of your questions again. There is a chat window on the right that you can use to ask me questions. Okay, so you can just go there and write a question. So let me type something there like, hi everyone. And then you should already see this question in the chat window. You can just reply, or you can just send a new message. I'm sure it will work for you. It's like any other chat window. All right, so is everyone ready? Shall we kick it off with the first topic? So how to, or what to ask the hiring manager? Well, before I would jump on these topics, I think we need to lay down the foundation, like who is a DevOps developer, and maybe we should even cover like why there is no, on one hand, there is no such developer like a DevOps engineer, because DevOps is a methodology, it's a set of processes. And on the other hand, like everyone these days is a DevOps developer, because DevOps is getting widespread. So eventually everyone into some extent is a DevOps developer. And this is important for you as a technical recruiter to realize, okay? So you can ask a good question when you are meeting the hiring manager, okay? So before we jump here, let me lay down the foundation. How can I wipe it here? So really briefly, you guys already know that there are two extremes, and whenever I look at some problem or some topic, I like to look at it on a scale, right? So there is this classical software developer, and then here is operations, like technical operations. So it's like ops, in other words, we just shortened ops, and here is development. And somewhere in the middle is DevOps. But when I say in the middle, it actually takes from both into some extent. So a regular software development, it could be, say, backend development or front-end development. It could be mobile app development, right? It could be the old school, Java backend development. It could be the new hyped, super cool React front-end website, right? But it still means getting some requirements, developing an application, and pushing it to production. This standard life cycle. While operations means as soon as it's already in production, then someone needs to take care of it. Okay, so if you look at the life cycle, then the life cycle is, hey, here someone has an idea, send the requirement to a developer, then a developer works on it, then developer tests it. So say here's some QA, and then if every test passes, then it's deployed to production, and then it is in production. So operations takes care of it. So say this is development, and this is production environment. Okay, and this is testing. As soon as all tests pass, I'll change color here to red. Okay, so if all tests pass, then it goes to production environment, and operations takes care of the production support. So this is very standard way, very common way of organizing software development. Recently, there has been a shift. There has been a little shift because it was inefficient. Okay, it was inefficient, and there are multiple reasons why. So first, as soon as a developer developed it, released to production, then someone was taking care of it. So one of the disadvantages of this approach is that the developers are discouraged to minimize the bugs because they don't fix them. So say someone here is focused on support, on fixing bugs. So here is an issue at 3 a.m. There is say outage, and the server admin needs to come and fix it. So there has been clashes historically between the server admins and developers. Server admins want to minimize the number of production issues. They want to maximize uptime. While for developers, they just want to ship it to production and then let someone else take care of it. So there has been this clash. Okay, and then someone came and said like, hey, why don't we connect the agile methodology, which is all about speed, all about agility, all about fast release cycles. Why don't we change also how the production and development teams work? Why don't we adjust it in a way that whatever the developer pushes to production, he also maintains, and it also shortens the release cycle, because the developer will, especially in a smaller company, will finish something, say it could be some new feature, then he or she ships it to production, sends to production environment, and then he also takes care of it. So the developer started also supporting it, taking care of the operations. And this person historically was, say, the server admin. I'll write it here. This could be the server administrator. And at some point, the server admin was tasked to optimize this flow, so the developers can ship to production faster, not just once a quarter like they used to, but every week or every day or even 10 times a day, or maybe like in Facebook, like every 5 minutes or so. So someone needs to come from the server administrator team and start building slightly different environment where developers can actually ship to production faster. So if I would just highlight it here. So say you have a year, there are 4 quarters, right? So say Q1, and historically, even in huge corporations, say banks, it's still common. You release only, say, once or twice a quarter. So say at the end of the quarter, you release. So dozens of developers work on some features, they build the code base, and then once a year, they dump it to production. And there could be some clashes. It's not really efficient. So there is a trend to increasing these production deployments, to increase the frequency, and to increase it into such an extent that actually it's all about continuous deployments. So that's where the term continuous deployment comes from. So we continuously deploy to production. and that's where the developers and operations team started merging, because at some point you have continuous deployment to production, like every day, there's a new feature deployed to production. So the developers were encouraged to also take care of some of the production issues, which was also helpful, and I saw it in my previous company, which I co-founded in Asia. And within our team, we had about 25 people. Some of them were software engineers, and some of them took care of the production environment. Like suddenly they started cooperating because developers started supporting the production environment. The developers starting taking care of whatever they produce, in terms of bugs or some support issues. So they started collaborating instead of having these clashes like it used to be very common in this old school, separated world. And then whenever I think about a developer, the developer and operations mix, I cannot actually forget one more, and that's also what we used to have in our company. So we had three teams. We had a team of software developers. We had a team of QA, and we had a small team of operations. You could call it some tech operations or tech support, say support team, like server administrator, okay? And here's QA team, and here was software developers team. So here we had a few guys here and there. In total, it was about 20 people, and I started noticing an interesting pattern, because at first these were completely separated. Okay, so software developers developed, then they shipped it to the QA team. Some of the features they shipped to QA team, and then a QA team tested it and shipped to operations. And there were all these clashes, like, hey, why this is not tested properly, why there are some bugs in the environment, and then, hey, we don't want to support it because it's a piece of crap and there are bugs. So constant clashes. I've also noticed how the new agile setup changed the way these teams work. Like they suddenly started collaborating, and they also started sort of blending. So it was no longer just the QA team and the software development team, and no longer just the technical operations team, but suddenly some of these guys worked on two different roles. So I would actually change here the word team, and now let's say these are just responsibilities, okay? Responsibilities or duties. So suddenly the one person who was developing 100% of his time, like suddenly he was developing, say, 60% of his time, and 20% he spent working on the continuous integration, continuous delivery, in other words, DevOps environment, and 10-20% of his time he was testing. So the person started working on three different areas, and I can see this as a software development area, QA, and operations. Okay, and this is the sweet spot for the DevOps developer, in other words. Okay, the DevOps engineer. Like DevOps engineer is someone who works on software development tasks. So he could, or he has background from software development, is keen to test, adjust some, to build automated testing, and he or she also supports the production life environment. So this is the sweet spot for the DevOps engineer. Okay, and people from, say, software development can shift to this role, or the system administrators can shift to this role also, or some of the QA, quality assurance team members can also shift to that role because they have a technical background. and they can also shift to this role. Okay, so hope this is clear, and it's important to realize that DevOps is a mixture of these three, you know, software development, operations, technical operations, and quality assurance. So it's a blend of these three responsibilities. So then the question is, based on this, what do you ask the hiring manager? You should actually ask the hiring manager, hey, and actually in some cases, companies still don't understand like what a DevOps engineer is, like who is the person, because DevOps is a methodology. You know, it's a set of processes. It's a culture. You know, it's a set of some best practices. So it's a very very vague term, right? So in many cases, I've seen also technical leaders who are confused, like, hey, do we have a DevOps team? There actually used to be companies where they build a DevOps team, but in my opinion, and you know, I also talk to other CTOs who think, hey, there is no such team, or there shouldn't be a DevOps team, because DevOps is a culture, it's a way how the team works. So in other words, DevOps tell you how the team, the whole, you know, software development team, together with QA and with technical support, how they should work together, how they should release continuously. So instead of the lengthy waterfall-ish project management, they should embrace agile methodology with say a Kanban board and then daily deployments. You know, how the environment should be organized in terms of you know, easy deployments and so on. So DevOps is a way to organize a company. It's like agile, right? Like there is no such thing as an agile developer, all right? But on the other hand, everyone is an agile developer in an agile environment. But nobody would write to a job description or sorry to a LinkedIn profile like, hey, I'm an agile developer. It doesn't make sense. Same here. This person would not have DevOps developer in his profile, neither this one nor this one. They are, say, QA operations manager or operations administrator, software developer, but they know the agile, the DevOps methodology. They embrace it. They know the best practices. They know the tools, and so on. Okay, so DevOps is a methodology, and that's why when you talk to the hiring manager, you need to know, like, hey, how does he think about the agile methodology? What does he think? Is he say is he even aware of this? Does he know what's the difference between DevOps and agile? And you should actually ask the hiring manager to tell you more about the setup, you know, the team setup, to describe how the team works, and if there is actually a need for a dedicated DevOps engineer. Now, who could be a DevOps engineer? Because sometimes let me step back and draw some, you know, team. So say this is one developer, another developer. So say this is a backend development team, and here is a team of front-end developers. Here are backend devs, and somewhere here you may have a server admin. Okay, and one day the server admin leaves, and someone comes and say like, hey, how about we replace the server admin with a DevOps engineer? And then suddenly there is no server admin, but there is a DevOps engineer. Hello, hi DevOps engineer. Okay, so instead of the, say, old school server admin, there is today a DevOps engineer. But is it a different person? Well, not really. You know, the tools evolve, but the role stayed into a large extent similar, if not the same. Because initially the server admin was managing the environment, took care of the production testing environments, setup, and now the DevOps engineer takes care of the deployments. Into large extent, obviously, takes care of the production environment, staging, testing, and so on, but also makes sure to and this is maybe something we could discuss in the other section of this webinar. So I'll not go too deep, but I just want to highlight the fact that that in some cases, some companies could call this person a DevOps engineer. So they have all these developers who work in the DevOps environment. So they all embrace the DevOps methodology. They use DevOps tools and best practices. They all have continuous integration in place, and so on, right? So they embrace Agile and DevOps, and they also have a DevOps engineer who, in fact, is just, if I say it so, just a server administrator. Although it's not just about servers. I'm just comparing the role, because also in the past, the server administrator was not only taking care of a server, right? So, but it's a very similar role to who a server administrator is or was. Okay, so now ask the hiring manager, do you really need a standalone DevOps engineer? And if yes, why? Does he need to create completely new environment? Like, have you never worked like in the company? Have you never had set up the DevOps environment? So this new DevOps engineer needs to be responsible for setting up the environment from scratch. So are you looking for someone who has already done it in the past, needs to come to your company, change everything to adapt to that DevOps best practices? Or has already been everything done in this respect, and you just need someone who will jump on a train and keep supporting what was already introduced and implemented? So this would be one of the questions I would be asking the hiring manager, to help me understand if you are looking, maybe you are just looking for a full stack developer who knows DevOps, because this guy is a full stack, or maybe someone here in the middle could be a full stack developer with DevOps knowledge. Like, still, this full stack developer needs to be able to script code. He needs to be able to deploy to production, to set up continuous integration, to set up unit tests, different environments, work with the cloud technology, or cloud services. So maybe the hiring manager is looking for this guy, but he, instead of calling him or her full stack developer, he says, hey, we need a DevOps engineer. But it could be very confusing, because here you need someone who codes, who programs in a DevOps environment, while here you need someone who comes with already existing knowledge and experience about how to set up the environment, how to come to a clean company, say a new company, new startup, and set up everything from scratch, all the processes, all the tools, how to combine it, how to test it properly, and set up from scratch. Okay, so that would be one of the questions. But let's move on, because the time flies, and we still covered just the first part, actually two parts. So the the DevOps teams, like what DevOps is. It's a methodology, culture, and not really a technology. It's a set of best practices. So that's why it's confusing to a lot of people. And second, we talk about the hiring manager discussions. But we only covered one question because we don't have time to really dive deeper. But inside the academy, there is much more content you can tap into whenever you need to go for a meeting with a hiring manager to talk about the DevOps role. Okay, second, let's talk about how to source. How to source the DevOps developers, DevOps engineers. And here again, well, I would like to mention again that if you guys have some questions, then feel free to ask me in a chat window, okay? So I can respond. Now, how to find them? Again, here I think you need to know first what tools do they use, and second, say what challenges do they face. Because then you can use search, for example, on LinkedIn to find developers who use tools. So now the question is, what tools? So some of the most popular tools are Chef and Puppet. Okay, so instead of going to maybe LinkedIn or whatever social network you prefer and searching for searching for DevOps, you may search for Chef, okay, or Puppet. And the reason is that since I mentioned, that developers do not often call themselves as DevOps engineers, they may call themselves full stack developer, but they still have experience with, the DevOps methodology, setting up the processes, setting up the environment. Or it could be a system administrator who works with Chef and Puppet, which is very common. Like I used to have a colleague who was a system administrator, so not just system administrator, but a server administrator with the knowledge of Puppet, which again is one of the most popular tools that DevOps developers use. I would mention continuous integration and continuous delivery, which you can search in this, like CI/CD, continuous integration /CD, and then maybe you could add like implement or so the person would have in his or her profile written, I implemented continuous integration, continuous delivery in our company. You are looking for a person who, for example, worked with Chef, worked with Puppet, and implemented continuous integration, continuous delivery. That could be the DevOps developer that you need to get for a client who needs to set up an environment again for him or for the company. Okay, so the challenges, what the challenges could be, for example, deployments, or one of the challenge could be to set up the deployment, to set up continuous integration and continuous delivery. So I'll write it here like this: set up continuous integration and continuous delivery. So you are looking for developers. Could be a full stack developer, it could be system admin, could be server admin, could be a quality assurance engineer who was managing and setting up environments to deploy automatically, and he or she set up continuous integration, continuous delivery. So these are some of the terms you guys need to be aware of so you can source the DevOps developers effectively, for example, on LinkedIn, okay? Especially with roles that are not so easy. Like, for example, with C++, it's easy because you just search for C++ and that's it. But with DevOps engineers, DevOps developers, it gets tricky because, as I mentioned, DevOps is a methodology. it's a culture, it's a set of best practices. So those developers may not have in title, I'm a DevOps developer. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now let's move on. Let's move on to the topic number 3, because time is running. It's really crazy, right? Okay, let me check the questions. How to interview. Okay, how to interview. Now, as soon as you source the developer, the question would be to interview, to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions. And I just wrote 2 or 3 right before we jumped on this webinar. So let me put down 3. How to interview. How to interview. So some of the questions you may ask. So for example, I would ask, hey, what is your favorite recipe? What is your favorite pattern? And for this, you actually need to know why would I ask so. For example, Puppet that I mentioned just a while ago, together with Chef, are configuration management systems, which in other words means that you need to set up environments, for example, testing environment, production environment, development environment, and you need to configure it somehow. There needs to be some password, some users, there needs to be some access, there needs to be maybe some IP address, white label, and so on. So somehow it needs to be tested. And for developers by nature are lazy, so they like to automate most of these things. So they write recipes. They write some recipe is a good way to name it. So some sets of tasks or next steps, and these are published even as open source. For example, Puppet has published lots of recipes, and you can ask a DevOps developer or a full stack developer, sysadmin, hey, what is your favorite recipe? And as soon as he or she doesn't have any clear answer, then he or she hasn't really set up any environment. He was not managing any environment in terms of setting it up. He could use it as a user, because a developer who works in a DevOps environment is a user in that environment, but they may not set it up, okay, if they don't have any favorite recipe. Or second question could be, hey, how do you feel about migrating 20 databases across 5 regions on Friday evening? And here immediately you will see, hey, is this the kind of person who is really or does really like the support part of it? Because if not, and it comes back to these 3 circles, or I'm not sure how to name it. So here we have software development, here we have QA, and here we have the operations part of it. So if the DevOps engineer, the DevOps developer doesn't like, for example, the support part, then he may not be a good fit for the DevOps engineer role, because it's quite common then things go wrong on Friday evening or Saturday night, and this person is on support. Someone needs to support it. So you could ask, for example, this question like, hey, how do you feel about a support issue on Saturday at 3 a.m.? And you should immediately see the reaction of the person, like, oh gosh, like that's I would hate it. And then it should already trigger some red flag. Or he or she say, yeah, well, that's okay. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 years, and it's not a problem for me. I don't have kids, and I can just wake up anytime. I work by or until 4 a.m. anyway. So that could be the answer you are waiting for. Or, for example, the question about migrating databases. It's important to realize that with big data, Also come big headaches because we need to migrate data across different time zones, across different regions. So for example, from Singapore data center to Sydney data center, and then to I don't know, New York data center. So that brings lots of headaches. It takes ages, and that's what the DevOps engineer should actually be excited about. It's not for everyone. So this is what you can ask the person. Okay, and I have more questions. Again, we could discuss it in length inside the Geek Culture Academy, which I would totally encourage you to, because we cannot really cover everything in this rather short webinar. Now, number 4, how to assess. Assess. Like this, assess. So how to assess? Well, I have some notes here. So what I would highlight. Well, let me put it down first so I don't forget anything. So first, obviously, expertise. Second, I would highlight team, compatibility, and 3, soft skills. Yeah, okay. So what is important for example, DevOps developers? It's all about monitoring. It's all about reporting, about analyzing data. So a DevOps developer should know how to monitor it constantly. You know, he or she should be excited to look at charts, to look at logs, to dive deeper. So he or she should have expertise in monitoring, in reporting to management, in I know, big data analysis. Okay, it's also connected to the soft skills, because it's not for everyone, right? So the person should be like he should have a deep desire to solve issues. Okay, so he should be solver. He should be a solver. He or she should be an investigator. I've seen it in the past a lot when we had an issue, and you know, the first developer looked at it. After 2 hours, he was already exhausted, couldn't dive deeper anymore. Second developer looked at it, again exhausted, and then the third DevOps developer, like the, what could we say, a DevOps engineer, looked at. He was more into the investigation, more into diving deeper. He was really curious. So it's all about curiosity, investigation, and that's what he was great at. So you want someone who is experienced in setting up the DevOps environment and then figuring out what went wrong as soon as things go wrong. You know, someone who investigates, someone who goes deep, someone who relentlessly looks at the log file that is I don't know, 10,000 lines long, and just, you know, finds the little one line that says what went wrong at 3 a.m. Okay, and obviously, looking at the team compatibility, you should look at for example, the compatibility with the current team. So does the developer have the same or similar skill set? Well, it doesn't actually need to have similar skill set. Just what I want to say, if the whole team already uses some technology, then the developer, the DevOps engineer, should already have experience and you know, should be compatible with the current technology. Because in the past, I've seen a developer who had slightly different experience in terms of technical stack join the team, and then try to convince everyone to use different technology. The developers were already used to, you know, what they were using, so there are these clashes, and that's not what you want. Okay. Okay. Long story short, what else? Well, let's leave this. Maybe I'll write a longer blog post to describe what to focus on during each of these sections. It's sort of clear that first you need someone who already set up an environment like that, so he has this experience. Then he works with the stack that is already in the company that the team uses and has soft skills to dive deeper, to investigate and figure out. So it's all about abilities. These maybe I should rename it to abilities because say curiosity or drive to investigate, it's not really a soft skill, right? Or maybe it could be number 4, so abilities. So because soft skill, it's all about, for example, communication in a DevOps environment, because the developers need to communicate, they adjusted something and they are deploying to production, while the DevOps engineer, the system admin, needs to communicate what's changed in terms of the deployment best practices and what are the expectations and so on. So long story short, here I would highlight communication skills, and here I would highlight maybe the drive to investigate and curiosity. Well, that's a difficult word. Curiosity. Okay, guys. The time is flying like crazy. It's 50 minutes down the road, so I think we only have time for one question. Oh no, still I wanted to cover how to motivate and attract developers. So let me go through that really briefly. How to motivate and attract DevOps developers. It's an important topic, so I cannot really skip it. How to attract and motivate. Okay, how to attract and motivate. I almost skipped it. It's crazy, right? That would be a pity, right, guys? So I have 4 bullet points that I would like to highlight. So first, data. Second, scale. Third, setup. How could I set up new or just operate? Team and okay, so how to attract and motivate DevOps developers. It's the very last subsection I would like to cover now. So first, what is really cool and exciting these days is data, big data, lots of data, right? Terabytes, petabytes of data. And DevOps developers, at least from my experience, like working with big data. So the more data, the more interesting it gets for DevOps developers, because it brings more challenges, right? With say part of the job of a DevOps engineer is to set up continuous integration, continuous deployment, but you can only get this far. You can set up, but as soon as everything is set up, then well, it's not as interesting as setting up a new environment. But with data, the further the company grows, the more data it collects and the more challenges it brings to the DevOps engineer table, or in the past it could be the system administrator's table. So this is one of the attractive attributes for DevOps developers. The more data, the better. If you can highlight it whenever talking to a DevOps engineer, great. Talk about the petabytes of data stored and how you need to analyze it. How do you store it in cloud environment? We could dive deeper here. Second, scale. Connected to the data, just say it's more about the scale of API requests. How do you need to manage the load, set up load balancers, how to I don't know, manage loads across different regions, how to back up, databases across 3 data centers and regions, and so on. Okay, so the bigger scale, the more challenges for DevOps developers, DevOps engineers, so the more interesting it gets. Okay, setup. So at least from my experience, it's really interesting for DevOps developers to set up new environments. So to come to a company that hasn't embraced the DevOps best practices yet, to implement it and then maybe leave the company. This is really exciting for many people, for many DevOps developers. Coming to an existing company, let's say a smaller company with 3 developers that has it already set up and doesn't reach the scale yet, it's not that interesting. So I would circle either new environment or scale. Okay, so one of these two should be, one of these 2 boxes should be ticked. Otherwise, the DevOps engineer may not be challenged enough. Okay, so either hey, we are looking for someone to set up, DevOps best practices, processes, tools. Can you come to our company for the next 6 to 12 months? That's interesting. Or hey, we have a huge challenge. We are processing 2 terabytes of data per day, and we cannot handle it. Can you help us adjust the environment? Wow, very cool, very interesting case. Or a team. In my experience, a team is a big driver, especially a senior team. If you can highlight that the team is senior, full of superstars, then great, do it. In my experience, it was also important to communicate the vision, like where do we want to get in terms of the DevOps setup. And this is what we were discussing quite a lot in my previous company, because DevOps developers, DevOps engineers, even full stack developers, system administrators, they know what are the trends, right? And they want to work in a company that wants to adjust to stay relevant, or to embrace the trends. Not legacy systems, but rather experiment and adapt to new trends and best practices. So it's important to communicate the vision where our DevOps team is getting. How do we as a company want to embrace the tools, best practices, tools, culture, and so on. Okay. And let me circle the data. That's also important. Okay, so if you are about to interview a DevOps engineer, don't forget to figure out how do you attract him or her, how do you motivate him to leave the current company and join the company, the opportunity you present him or her. It could be either scale or new, it could be a great team and data, and this, I would say it's rather a hygienic factor, so it should be communicated clearly, but no one, at least in my eyes, like no one will really leave a good company to a new one just because they have interesting DevOps vision, right? Like it should tick one of these other boxes. Okay, so we have, say, 2 more minutes for one of your questions. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. So let me look at the. Oh wow! Thanks a lot for these questions, guys. Much appreciated. We cannot really cover all of these because we need to wrap it up now. I value your time, and I still need to follow up on some other things, other clients. So we need to wrap it up in maybe 3 minutes. I will only answer one of these questions. So where to find these developers besides LinkedIn? Well, that's obvious, right? Like LinkedIn is the first choice. We've already touched upon how to use LinkedIn to search based on some other keywords, not DevOps, but for example, Chef Puppet. So what could be some other sources? Like, do you guys know, for example, devops.com? You need to go where the developers are, right? So for example, Slack. Okay, so if I'll be looking at for example, Slack channels, I would look at where DevOps, what channels DevOps engineers hang around, and they actually have a Slack channel dedicated to this community. So you can you can penetrate this community. You can enter this community as a recruiter. They are completely fine with this. I was just recently in a Slack channel for this DevOps community. They have a jobs channel. I'm not actually logged in right now, so I cannot show you in a screen share, but I will post inside the Geek Recruiter Academy more detailed info about how to use Slack to connect to this community of DevOps developers, and then how to post a job post there. So it's easy. They're open. Similarly, other communities also use different Slack channels. So this is one of the trends these days. In the past, they used IRC, but that's only well, it's fading out. In other words, okay. But Slack is trending. So you as a recruiter should be on Slack. You should have access to all these communities and then use the job channels inside. Well, that's at least the easiest way. Then you can, of course, start approaching people one by one, because you can send direct messages, but that would also take ages. You cannot really send a mass email to these guys. Luckily, otherwise they would not let you in. Okay, so with this, I will wrap it up, and I'll keep your questions, guys, here. And inside the academy, I will respond to all these. If there is something we don't know yet, then I'll ask some of the other technical leaders, technical recruiters that we have inside the academy, because one person cannot know everything, but it's all about collective wisdom, collective knowledge. So we can share best practices, we can talk, and so on. So there is just so much more that can help you as a technical recruiter to know how to source, how to interview, how to assess, how to motivate developers to leave their company, to join and follow the opportunity you present. So there is so much more, and I believe it just starts with technical understanding. Like these things, for example, what are the differences between Agile and waterfall, Kanban, and Scrum? Like that's just the basic stuff. Okay, like that's your foundation. That's what helps you with some small talk conversation starters. But then you need to build on this knowledge, right? To become a really superstarish technical recruiter, the best recruiter in town, you need to know where to find these developers, how to read between the lines, what are the differences between I don't know, Chef and Puppet, and how can you source developers based on some of these keywords. Okay, like everyone is searching based on DevOps, but you can search based on Chef, Puppet, and some other tools they use. So these are the things you can learn inside the academy, and I'm super keen to share some of the other best practices together with the extensions that we built for recruiters to help them get more productive, to send more messages, more emails to recruiters, to automate some of these tasks, or at least, if not automate completely, at least make them easier, make them faster, because it's all about productivity, right? You want to earn more money, you want to hire more developers, and we are here to help you achieve that. So if you haven't signed up for the Geek Recruiter Academy, it could be the right time, because we are just now completing the advanced courses where we dive deeper to different roles, Java developers, backend developers, front-end developers. We look at how to hire these, where to find them, how to source them, how can you talk to them, how can you attract them, how can you motivate them to join your company. So go ahead, become a Geek Recruiter, join the Geek Recruiter Academy. Have a wonderful day, everyone.